Let's talk Dexter Season 3, Episode 1, entitled Our Father. This season takes place just several months after the end of Season 2, and Dexter's life has gotten pretty much back to normal. Now, we are immediately introduced to a new detective at the police department. His name is Joey Quinn. And during this episode, you actually find out that Joey Quinn, the new detective, is being investigated by internal affairs. And Deborah is approached several times in the episode to give out information, which she is not willing to do. Now, at the beginning of this episode, there are two girls that end up getting killed by a guy named Freebo. This is information that Dexter finds out. And he actually goes to kill Freebo and get him off the streets. Freebo is a well-known drug addict. Well, not drug addict, drug dealer. Prior to killing Freebo and going to kill him, Dexter decides to show up at his house during the day to find out who he is and get the lay of the land to be able to go in and do the kill that night. That night, or during that day, Dexter is actually introduced to Freebo's girlfriend while he's there. Freebo doesn't really introduce her, but she's there. She comes out and Freebo chastises her. Well, later on, this girl actually ends up dead. And she's known as a Jane Doe to the police department. They don't know that she is related to Freebo, which is going to come into play here in a minute because we're going to get to the main storyline. But first, I wanted to talk about the other little story threads first. Now, also during this episode, you find out that Dexter has a really good relationship with his girlfriend, Rita. Things have gotten really good. I think they have sex 3 times during this episode. And at the very end, she starts to have these cravings for chocolate pudding. And you find out at the very end that she is pregnant. All right, we also find out at the beginning of this episode that Angel Batista is getting promoted to sergeant, which is pretty cool. Lots of little story threads are going on. Let's talk about the main storyline here. When Dexter actually goes to Freebo's house that night, he ends up seeing Freebo with another guy and there is an altercation. Freebo runs off and Dexter ends up having to fight off this other individual and ends up having to stab and kill him. Now, this does upset Dexter because this goes against everything that his father taught him. And it goes against his code, against everything, so he's wondering who this individual is. The next morning, Dexter is called to the crime scene, and we find out that the guy that Dexter killed that night was a guy named Oscar Prado. Now, you find out that Oscar Prado is the brother of Miguel Prado, and Miguel Prado is a very well-known district attorney there in Miami. And Miguel Prado was actually played this season by Jimmy Smits. So we've got Freebo in the wind, we've got Oscar Prado dead, the assistant district attorney wondering what happened to his brother, and later on, Deborah does some investigating and finds out that Oscar Prado was actually a druggie, and he was there for drugs, and there was probably some kind of altercation with him and Oscar Prado. Deborah finds out later from an informant that Oscar Prado was actually a druggie, and he was doing regular dealings there with Freebo. So we've got a lot going on in this episode. Now, there's an interesting scene that happens towards the end of the episode when Deborah lets all of this information out. She tells everybody at the police department, and she doesn't know that Miguel is there in the background, and she does it in a kind of a condescending way towards his family. And that's when Miguel walks out. And what ends up happening is LaGuerta asks Batista to take Deborah off the case. LaGuerta doesn't want Deborah working on it because of the sensitive nature. And you find out apparently that LaGuerta and you've got Prado, actually, Miguel Prado, the district attorney, have actually had a history in the past. And we'll find out more about that in upcoming episodes. All right, so there's a lot of little story threads going on. I mean, they bring up a lot of new things. We've got the new detective in Joey Quinn. We've got Dexter, his girlfriend is now pregnant. We've got Batista who gets promoted. And we've got the whole thing with this, the Prado family coming up. So there's a lot of different things happening in this first episode. So there's the recap on Season 3, Episode 1 of Dexter, entitled Our Father.